Hi everyone, welcome again to Scientist Chats. This is week 9. We're having it today on Thursday, June 11th. And just a few things before we get started. As per usual guidelines, so all attendees under the age of 13 should be supervised by a parent or guardian. So I just want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. We have 2 more weeks of Scientist Chats left, one on June 17th and the next one on June 24th. And today we have a very, very exciting topic. So it is about microbiome and the gut. I'm sure a lot of you have been hearing about it recently. It's a field of study that's been on the rise, and I think it's very, very important. I'm actually very intrigued about what we will learn today. So our guest today is Dr. Emma Allen-Vercoe. She's a professor and a research chair at the University of Guelph in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Emma Allen-Vercoe. Hi.
Thank you. Thanks, Adisa. I don't know if anyone can see me in live on the screen. There we go. It's great to be here. And so what I thought I would do is I'll throw up some slides and walk you through a little bit of my background and what I do in my lab, and then we'll hand the rest over for questions from you guys, because I love questions. The crazier the better, so think of some crazy questions, because they're always the best, the funnest. So let me just get my screen up, and then we can go. Okay, so hopefully we can all see that. So I've titled this talk "The Scoop on Poop," and really it's about, so the first part anyway, is about how I became what I call a poop engineer. So you're probably wondering, what on earth is a poop engineer? So let me give you a little bit of background about me. So obviously I have an accent. My accent is from England. I'm from London originally, but I've been in Canada now for 20 years. When I was a little girl growing up in England, I used to love astronomy, and for the longest time, so first of all, I wanted to be an astronaut. Then I realized that I have terrible eyesight, so that's probably not going to happen. So then I decided, well, as long as I can just do science, I'll be happy. And the science that I was really excited about the most was astronomy. And so I studied astronomy from a very early age, and I got very good at it. And I still have it as a hobby, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And so I studied the stars. And I decided that I was going to make a career out of this. So when I was at high school and I had to make decisions about what I was going to do at university, I decided I wanted to do astrophysics. But some massive spanner was thrown into, a big wrench thrown into the works, and that was the fact that my math skills are not strong enough. Now, I'm good at math, but you need to be really good at math to do physics or astrophysics. And so my advisor at the time quite rightly suggested that I think about doing something else. And so for a little while I was very depressed, but then I discovered something very cool, and that was biology. And I hadn't really looked at biology up until and I absolutely love it. Very well set up for the rest of your life. So so I have studied for microbiology, as I said, for a long time. I'm not going to tell you exactly how long, because that will give away my age, and I'm feeling very old. But for a long time. And as I said, I came to Canada 20 years ago. I studied infectious disease for a long time, lots of nasty bacteria, I worked on what we call level 3 pathogens, which are very infectious, nasty pathogens. I worked on the microbe that causes a disease called tuberculosis. I worked on the microbe that causes anthrax. I worked on the microbe that causes botulism. Some really nasty microbes, and but I decided that I didn't really want to work on nasty microbes, because everyone was focusing on the really bad guys and no one was focusing on good microbes. And in fact, when I started working on beneficial microbes, as we call them now, no one really thought that bacteria in particular could be beneficial, right? So we were thinking about all the bad guys, and no one had focused on these good guys. And so I thought maybe that's where my career should lie. And so let me see. So I now work on what we call the human microbiome, and I particularly work on the human gut microbiome. Okay, and that's why I have the nickname Dr. Poop. Because I actually work on a lot of poo, because poo, when it comes out, is full of microbes, and actually those microbes are very representative of what you find in someone's gut. So we can, without having to do any nasty invasive tests on people, we can actually take their poop and we can see just kind of what's growing in their gut and what their health looks like. And so I got very interested in this from in a very early stage. So the science of the microbiome is very young. It only really came into being in a big way in around about 2005, which feels like maybe a long time ago, but actually isn't in the grand scheme of things. And what we didn't realize until that point is that we are not just humans. So we used to think of ourselves as humans, and that microbes, we knew that they were there, but we didn't think that they were doing much about being there, except really they were just passengers hitchhiking on us and probably causing disease. And it wasn't until around about this time that I started studying the microbiome that we realized that actually these microbes are extremely important to us, and they're actually part of us. And you should even consider yourself as a superorganism, okay? So I put the Superman sign there because I really do think that the microbes make us amazing. Without the microbes, we can't do a great deal of things. And they don't give us super strength, but what they do is they give us some superpowers in terms of biochemistry. And what do I mean by that? So if you think about human cells, and humans in particular, we're very puny when it comes to biochemistry. We're not very good at biochemistry. We can do a lot of things, but we can't do a lot of really complicated pathways. But when we have these microbes associated with us, one thing that microbes are, particularly bacteria, is they're masters of biochemistry. So they provide for us incredible amounts of metabolism that we couldn't do without them. And so they're actually extremely important to us. And we're only really realizing now, and still realizing every day, papers are coming out about this, how important these microbes are to our health and our physiology. And that is a really important thing to try to get across. So even though I recognize that most of you listening here probably don't want to hear about biochemistry or metabolism because they're very complicated chemistries, I'm not going to talk about that, so don't worry too much. I'll just talk about them in very broad terms. You just have to understand that these microbes have been around on planet Earth for many, many billions of years, or several billions of years, I should say, many millions of years, longer than we have. And so they've actually figured things out in much more clearly than we have. And so as a result, even though they don't look very interesting, they're kind of just like little tiny blobs, and they sort of float around, they don't look like they're doing much. They're actually incredibly good at biochemistry. And so they're very, very important to us. And it's amazing that we have created this space for them in our bodies to help us with our health. And so we shouldn't ignore them. And I just want to give you a couple of definitions here, because I'm going to use these terms quite a bit, and I want to make sure that you all understand. So when I talk about microbes, what I mean are really just organisms that can't be seen with the naked eye. That's actually not the strict definition of a microbe, but it works for this talk, so don't worry too much. But really, microbes include things like bacteria, like viruses. Those are also considered to be microbes. So the nasty one that's causing COVID-19 right now is a virus. And also things like yeast, so the stuff that makes your bread rise and makes beer and wine, which is obviously very important to me. Those are also microbes, and there are many different types of microbes that are studied under that umbrella. Now, when I use the term microbiome, what I mean there is the collection of microbes in a given place. And so when I talk about the human microbiome, I'm talking about the collection of microbes that you'd find in a human. And when I talk about the gut microbiome, I'm talking about the collection of microbes that you'll find in the gut, or the poop, if you like, is a readout of that. Okay, So I just wanted to put that through because I know that I use those terms, and sometimes people say to me afterwards, well, what was that? What do you mean by that? And I realized that I didn't make that very clear. So hopefully I've not made that mistake this time. So then the big question is, now I've told you that we are superorganisms of human cells and bacterial cells and viral cells and yeast cells. So how human are we? And actually that was a question that, because scientists are very good at asking very intricate questions, it was a question that was actually answered not too long ago by a group of scientists who actually counted the cells inside a reference human, so the average kind of human, based on a lot of very clever math. So this reference human was around 70 kilograms, 20, 30 years old, 1.7 meters tall. They were able to actually calculate how many human cells that person would have, obviously rounded up, but still. And what they discovered, or what they determined, was that there are around 30 trillion human cells in his body, his or her body. And then they did the same kind of count up of the bacterial cells. Now they only looked at the bacterial cells because those are the ones which are in the majority in the microbiome, but there are other microbiome members as well, as I'll get to in a second. But just in terms of the bacteria, what they found is that there's 39 trillion bacterial cells. So if you do a little bit of math there, and it's not scary math, it's just doing a ratio, you can see that we are 1 part human to 1.3 parts bacteria. So we're actually more bacterial than we are human. And so that's a pretty astounding fact. I think one that makes it even more surprising is that we didn't really bother to look at this until 2005 or so. And until that time, we just didn't really consider that these microbes are very important. Now, the other question then is, if we're 1.3 part bacteria and 1 part human, then why don't we look like bacteria? Well, the answer to that is, of course, that bacterial cells are way, way smaller than human cells. So on average, around 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000th of the size. And so very, very tiny. That's why we need those huge microscopes to look at them. Now, when you think about poop, so when we talk about the whole microbiome, we're talking about every surface of the body. But poop is actually one of the parts of the body where most bacteria will be found. And that's because it's reflective of the colon, which is, again, one of the parts of the body where there's most bacteria. So every gram of poop, or feces, the better term, the scientific term to use, contains around 10 to the 11 bacterial cells. That's 10 trillion cells, bacterial cells in the average poop. That's an enormous number, okay? And so every time you take a poop, you're losing an awful lot of bacterial cells. And so for a very small amount of time, you're actually, after you've taken a poop, you're actually more human than you are bacterial. And so maybe that's why sometimes you feel a bit more human, I don't know. But just for a short period of time, until those bacteria can kind of replicate and come up in their numbers, that ratio adjusts a little bit. So I wanted to show you some actual pictures of what these microbes, what this microbiome looks like. And a little while ago, I was involved in an episode of a CBC show called The Nature of Things, where we were doing a Mythbuster show on myths about poop. And one of the myths that we were trying to bust is that when you eat sweet corn, it emerges the other end completely unchanged. And I'm not sure how many of you have heard that myth. It is actually a myth. What you're seeing, of course, is the sweet corn in your poop. It's not that it's not undigested, it's just the hull. So the outer part of the sweet corn is not digested, but the inner part, the soft part, has been digested. And so we decided we would look at this by feeding the presenter, Jennifer Gardy, with sweet corn, a lot of sweet corn, and then taking her poop and digging around in it for a few kernels of poop, and then putting that under a very high-powered microscope called an electron microscope that allows us to see things which are really very tiny by firing electrons at it. And we use something called a scanning electron microscope, which gives us some really lovely 3D images. And here at Guelph, we're very lucky. We've got some really high-end equipment that allows us to do this. So what I want to show you is just a series of images from the same region. And what we're going to do is we're going to zoom down on this piece of this piece of sweet corn. So this is just a fragment of the sweet corn that we dug out of the poop. Okay, and so what you can see here, I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can make a cursor. Yeah, okay, can you see this on the screen? Yes, okay. So this is a very important bar here. This is actually a size bar. We use this to show us how, you know, the range of the size that we're looking at in the image. And so this is showing that this length here, that is that my cursor is picking up for you, is it represents 1 millimeter. Now you've seen 1 millimeter on a ruler. It's a very tiny little piece. So this is sort of 1 millimeter will be about that length. Okay, so you can see here the sweet corn. You can see the sort of outer husk. Now, if you look very, very hard, do you think you can see bacteria? Well, the answer is no, you can't. You can't see bacteria at this scale. What you can see here is sort of some texture, but though you wouldn't be able to see the bacteria. So let's zoom in a little bit further and let's see what we can see. Oh, I need to. All right, so this is at 500 microns, okay, so this is half a millimeter, so you can kind of see a little bit further, a little bit closer up, you can see the sweet corn kernel, you can see the structure of that again, and you can see all the sort of like striations. It's kind of interesting. Do you think you can see bacteria? The answer is no, you can't. You still can't see bacteria, even at this size, even at this scale. So let's go down a little deeper. Now, how about now? Do you think you can see bacteria? So this is at the 100 micron scale. This is a 1/10 of a millimeter, this size bar here. The answer is if you squint, yes, you can just about see some bacteria, okay? So I'm going to show you, and we'll take it a little bit further down, and you'll be able to sort of resolve them a bit easier. Here they are, okay? So this is at the 20 micron scale. So here are the striations again of the sweet corn. And these little things that are like jelly beans stuck to the surface, these are the bacteria, okay? So these are the bacteria that have been feasting on the sweet corn that Jennifer Gardy ate for our experiment. And at this scale, you can kind of see some sort of bacteria, this one here in particular, if you can see that, they're sort of like almost got hairs on it. And some others look a little bit sort of bald. So let's take a little bit further. Let's go in a little bit further and take a look, and you can see that even better. So this is at 10 micron scale, and you can start to see that even though you might think bacteria are boring and they're just little blobs of jelly and they don't do very much and they all look the same, you can actually start to see a few differences between different sorts of cells here. Some of them look like coffee beans, a bit more rounded. Some of them look very long. There's a nice, there's a little long one there. And we can go even further than that. This is at the 5 micron scale, and then one more. This is at the 3 micron scale. So you can really see now the differences between all these jelly beans, and you can see that they're all quite different. And this is kind of, I love this image because I think it shows so many things that I wish I had time to talk to you about, but it really does show you that bacteria are incredibly diverse. The other thing that it shows you is that, see, there's some teeny tiny ones here and there's some bigger ones here. Some of them, if you look very carefully, have hairs that connect them together. And actually, we now know that bacteria do almost communicate with each other by sticking together in these communities that allows them to communicate more effectively together. And I'll show you how that is. And some of them, even this one, looks like it's sort of wearing something that's been knitted out of wool. And they have these incredible coats of armor, almost, if you like, that allow them to interact with their environment and protect them from their environment as well at the same time. So they're very, very fascinating things. And I think this picture of all of them sums up why I became a microbiologist. I think it's an absolutely fascinating area to be. Now, there are 100 trillion microbial cells in your body. And if your body was a planet, the gut, and especially the colon, as I'm going to tell you now, the colon is the lower part of your gut. So that's the last part of your gut where the poop gets made, if you like. If your body was a planet, then the colon would be its biggest supercity. Okay. Now we know most about the bacterial species of the microbiome. There's around 200 to 500 species present in the gut. And so here's my picture of a bacterium. But as I wanted to mention as well, There are also abundant archaea. Now, what are archaea, you might ask me? So archaea look like bacteria, but it turns out that they're representative of a completely different domain of life. They're still microbes, but they're very different from bacteria. They're more closely related to us humans than they are to bacteria. And they have some really amazing biochemistries, and we have some of those in our guts. They actually make methane, which is very important biochemistry. We also have viruses, and for the most part, these aren't viruses that make us sick. These are viruses. This is a picture of a particular type of virus that infects bacteria. So just like we get infected by viruses, bacteria and archaea as well get infected by viruses. And this is sort of very similar to the type of virus that would infect a bacteria. So we have very many of those in our guts as well. If for the most part, those viruses are beneficial. So I know that's a very weird thing to think, that viruses can be beneficial, especially in this day and age. But a lot of these viruses have real benefits that we're only just beginning to discover. And then we also have yeast, and this thing that looks like a potato actually is a yeast. So very, very small. This is the yeast is what I was telling you is important for making bread. The fermentation that is carried out by yeast actually makes all sorts of important compounds, which we use in industrial processes and food. But we also have yeast in our gut, and those yeasts are also beneficial. And then we have things called protists and other critters, which again, I don't have too much time to talk about, but these are much more closely related to us. Even though they don't look like us, they're a little bit bigger. Things like amoeba and other things like that. So we have this incredible super city of all these bugs all mushed together, doing amazing things. And that's really what I'm studying. Now, microbes, this is a very important slide, even though it's a little bit of chemistry, and I don't want to put anyone off. I'm not going to talk too much chemistry. But microbes actually talk to each other, and they talk to us. But they don't use language. They don't use words like we do. They use chemicals. And for the most part, they use chemicals that we call small molecules, which is a very kind of bland term. It just means that these molecules are very small. Now, some of these molecules are extremely important to our health. And we didn't realize this, again, until we started studying them in a lot of detail. And the microbes in our gut, it turns out, are masters at making these small molecules, which are really good for our health. And that is where all the research at the moment, or most of the research, is being focused on trying to understand this chemical language and how does it impact us and how can we harness it to make ourselves better or more well, or to help with our health. This is an instrument. Now, this is very similar to an instrument that we have at the University of Guelph, but I couldn't find a picture that had a person in it, and I wanted to give a nice perspective of how big it actually is. It's a large instrument that we use called an NMR spectroscope. And I don't want to again scare you too much, but basically this is the kind of instrument that allows us to actually understand that language and to read that language that these bacteria make. And what it does is, it's just a huge, huge magnet, okay? And in fact, it's such a big magnet that you can't really wear jewelry near it, and you shouldn't wear a pacemaker or anything like that. So it's in its own room at the University of Guelph that's sort of behind a wall to keep it free from people wandering in there who might, that wouldn't be a good thing. But these are incredible instruments. So what we do is we actually take the molecules that these microbes are producing, and we can put them in the top of that instrument. And when we put them in the top of that instrument and we switch the instrument on, the magnets are so strong that they actually make the bonds in those small molecules vibrate. And that vibration, that we can pick that up using computers. And by doing that, we can actually tell what these molecules are just by looking at the vibrations that they produce, which sounds like science fiction's been. It's an incredible instrument, and we use it all the time, and it honestly has changed the way that we do research in my lab. We use this instrument a great deal, and every time I look at it, I think what an incredible piece of engineering it is, because though they've been around for a long time, it really has made our work much easier to do, and we have some really incredible additions to this instrument that really make it very sensitive and user-friendly. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Have you fed your gut microbes today? The reason I'm putting this up is because I told you that these microbes make a lot of small molecules, and that these small molecules are important for your health. The thing is, I mean, I don't know how many of you listen to what Health Canada tells us. we must eat 5 vegetables or fruits a day. And how many of us actually do that? So I do. But the reason that I do is because I know that the reason that we need to eat that many fruits and vegetables a day is because these are the foods that feed our microbiome. Okay, these fruits and vegetables, this fiber. So this fiber that we all hear about is mostly present in fruits and vegetables and grains as well, but for the most part, fresh fruits and vegetables. And so if you're not eating your five a day, you're actually starving your gut microbes, and that's actually doing a disservice to your microbes, because now they can't really help you. They can't benefit you by producing these small molecules that are so important for health. And so that's why I'm asking you, have you fed your gut microbes a day? And if you haven't, then perhaps when you come off this call, perhaps you might want to go find some fruit and eat an apple or something, or encourage your parents to make you a nice meal full of vegetables tonight or something like that, and feel very good about feeding your gut microbes. If you have an imbalance in your microbiome, so if your microbiome is not producing those types of small molecules, or if you are missing some microbes, perhaps through you've had some treatment or something, or you've had some poor health in the past, if you're missing these microbes, you're missing these small molecules, and that can have some very bad effects on health. And that's really what my lab is doing. My lab studies how this gut microbiome can be damaged by what we call industrialized lifestyles. And that means that us here in the Western world, we take medicines for things, we are exposed to environmental toxins, and we eat a very poor diet. We don't eat enough fruits and vegetables, for example. And so what we've done is we've created a very special system in our lab we call the Robogut to study gut microbes in the lab. And this is what it is. And again, I don't want to frighten you too much by looking at this. I'm going to show you a few pictures. This is the colon. So this is the part of the gut I was telling you about. This is what we study. And this colon is actually nature's answer to a very sophisticated piece of machinery we use in the lab called a bioreactor. In fact, we use a bioreactor in the lab to copy what's going on in the body. And so this bioreactor, this is what we have here. Okay, so this bioreactor is a vessel here. This is a glass vessel, and it looks very complicated. I'm going to show you an actual picture in a minute. But this is where the action is happening. This is our actual ecosystem is in this glass vessel, and we feed it with food that's coming in, and we take waste out that's coming out. And we have a whole bunch of probes in here which measure things like pH and temperature and keep it nice and steady, just like your colon would do in your own body. And so bioreactors can be used to recreate that human colonic environment. And this is what it actually looks like. So this is a series of Roboguts, and the actual Roboguts are seated in here. So you can just kind of see this sort of brown sludge sitting in here. Excuse me. And this is actually where the action is. So we're very excited to sort of host these ecosystems, and we can actually host them outside of the human body and keep them alive in this sort of like life support system for for weeks at a time. And by doing that, we can study them and we can do all sorts of fun things to them, some of them not so nice, without hurting anyone, which is a really important thing to remember as well. And then this is where the vessels are. Just to sort of orientate you. And then the back end of this is the other side of the Roboguts. This is the important part, right? So this is where we collect all the waste. So these big 4-liter bottles are full of waste, okay, which doesn't smell very good, as you can imagine. It smells like poop, but we call it liquid gold because it looks like gold to us. And in fact, it's absolutely chock full of all of those chemicals, all of those small molecules that I told you were so important for microbial life. And so we can put this in the NMR spectroscope, and we can eavesdrop on these microbial conversations. And then by doing that, we can actually understand how these microbes are talking to each other, and by extension, how they're talking to us. And we can see if there's a problem, we can see if we can try and put it back, put it right. So it turns out that there's many diseases that we now know of that are associated with an imbalance in the gut microbiome, and we now study lots of these diseases. Some of them will be very familiar to some of you. Some of you may even suffer from these. But it turns out that all of these diseases seem to have their roots, cause, or seem to be associated in some way with an imbalance in the gut microbiome, which is incredible for some of them because they're not gut diseases. And so it was thought to be, again, science fiction for a long time, but now we have a lot of data to support that actually health begins in the gut. That's a tenet of Chinese medicine as well, I believe. So I think they had that right. So health starts in the gut, and that's why it's so important to eat a healthy diet and so important to look after your gut microbiome. And so just to finish off, I have one more slide to show you. In my lab as well, so I've just told you what I do in my academic lab. That's what I do in terms of research. But a few years ago, we realized the potential of what we were doing was so important. We actually started a company in 2013 to develop what we call bugs as drugs. So we can actually use some of these microbes to put them back into, some of the beneficial microbes anyway, put them back into people's bodies if they're sick. And they're missing these microbes to try to help them deal with disease. And so that's our company goal, is to fix these imbalances in the gut to combat disease and enhance health. So we have a whole bunch of trials going on, and a lot of hard work has gone into this. The company, the people in the company working very hard, because a lot of these microbes are extremely hard to culture in the lab. And so we've had to learn an awful lot just to get them into these capsules and so that they're live, and then be able to distribute them and give them to people and see how they work. So with that, I'm going to stop, and then I will hand it over and see if there's any good questions. I'm going to see if I can come out of the share screen so you can see me again. It's going to let me do that. There we go. There, so you can see me again.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I know I have a lot of questions. I hope everyone else has questions as well. So, since you just mentioned that company that you started, is this the equivalent of probiotics? So how is this different? What is the similarity between your product and probiotics? And are probiotics, like readily available probiotics, are they useful?
Okay, that's a great question. I get asked that an awful lot. So probiotics are microbes which, if you ingest them in enough numbers, they have beneficial effects on health. The difference between what we're doing and probiotics is, first of all, that we are working with whole ecosystems. So instead of in a capsule with a probiotic, there's maybe 1, 2, or 3 strains of bacteria. Usually those strains are very closely related to each other. Our product is actually a whole, like a miniature ecosystem that we can put into the gut. And just like settling immigrants in a city, if you've got more than one immigrant working in different area, you have a lot more success at establishing within that community. And so we find that our ecosystem components actually what we call engraft, which is a terrible word, I really don't like it, but they actually can live within the guts of the person we give it to for a fairly long period of time. Whereas a probiotic is only actually present during the time that you're taking it. After that, it's gone. So the other major difference is the fact that probiotics are considered to be food supplements. So you can buy them in the supermarket even, and they're considered very safe. So you can take them. It's very difficult to overdose on them, I should think. Our product is considered a biologic drug, which is actually the hardest class of drug to get regulatory approval for. And the reason for that is because we don't know a lot about the microbes that we've put in there, because they're very new to science. We've only just sort of discovered them. So we need a bit more of a level of control over how we administer them to people and how we can monitor people to make sure that they don't get sick.
Okay. Oh, that's fascinating. I have a follow-up question, but I'll go to the chat and then I'll ask you my follow-up question later on. Okay. So the first question from the chat here is, what color are microbes?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. Okay, so the answer is they have no color. And the reason for that, when they're on their own anyway, the reason for that is because we look at color, we perceive color because of the wavelength of light. Okay, so we can see things have a color because of the way that they interact with light and the wavelength of light. The interesting thing about microbes is that they're smaller than the wavelength of light. And so they, on their own, they actually have no color. We can, oh, my phone is just, I'm just going to ignore that. It'll stop in a minute. The other thing that we can do with these microbes is that when we grow them on plates, we can actually scrape off an awful lot of this material, this biomass. And when you do that, you can see the color because you're putting all these microbes together. And when you do that, they range in color actually. So some microbes, most of them are kind of like a beige color, like a dull beige color. Some of them are bright white. Some of them have pigments. We have one that's purple, which is really awesome because it's making a pigment. And we have one that's that looks like orange chocolate drops. You know, those sort of like butterscotch drops. They actually look like that on a plate, even look like little droplets. So it depends on the microbe is the answer. But yes, absolutely, on their own, they have no color because they're too small to have even color.
Wow. Okay. So I have two questions I'm going to combine. So the first part is, how many types of microbes are there? And the second part is, are there more good or bad microbes?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so the answer to the first part, how many types of microbes are there? Thousands and thousands and thousands. We were only just starting to look at them. Now, in the human gut, which I study, there's around 200 to 500 different species of bacteria in the average person. And for each person, though, they're quite different. So actually, your microbiome in your gut is a little bit like a fingerprint. So it's unique to you. It sticks around with you for most of your life unless you really mess with it. And it's very different from the next person. So you can actually tell. So if I had a poop sample from everyone on this call and you told me your names, and then in a year's time you gave me a poop sample but you left it blank as to what the names were, I should be able to analyze it and be able to match the poop sample to the person. So that's a very cool thing about the microbiome, is we call it a poop print, like a fingerprint. And sorry, the second part of that question?
The second part, are there more good or bad microbes?
That is a great question. So you would think from learning about microbiology in the past that there were more bad bacteria, for example, or bad microbes than good microbes. But again, I kind of alluded to that at the beginning. The reason for that is because for 200 years or so, microbiology has focused on the bad guys. So we know far, far more about the bad guys than we do about the good guys, or even the ones which don't cause disease, which are just environmental organisms. And that's a real shame, because it's given us a very skewed view of microbiology, as microbiology and disease kind of go hand in hand. But in fact, it's only a tiny fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the number of bacteria or bacterial species in the world that are pathogens. We can actually, we've catalogued most of the pathogens by now, and they're only a very small number in comparison to the number which do us no harm or even are beneficial. So really, that's why I'm studying the beneficial microbes, because they've been ignored, and I think that's wrong. I think we really need to study those microbes to kind of give us a better picture of what microbiology is.
Oh, okay. So just a quick follow that came to mind because of that. So how do you feel about us using terms like bugs and germs to relate to microbes then, if more of them are beneficial than harmful?
Yeah, so I don't mind the term bugs, although I think that sometimes is confusing because they're not insects, and I think it's a little tricky. So I don't ever use that term in a sort of an academic way. Mm-hmm. I'm teaching, I wouldn't use bugs, but I do when I'm just talking colloquially, because I think that people sort of understand. The term germs I don't like, because again, I think that has a connotation with, but bugs that make us sick, and that's not true. So I don't think that all bacteria are germs, for example, and so I don't like that term. So I try and use microbes where I can.
Okay. So everyone heard that. Please use microbes instead of the term germs if you can. All right. All right. So since you're mentioning it, each of us having, okay, these are very good questions I could combine. Each of us having our own type of own poop print, as you call it, right?
Yeah.
So it's a combination of the questions there. First of all, how do they get into your body? And I mean, does each person produce it? Are we born with a specific type set that comes with us? Like what is the story about that?
Oh, that's a great story. And the answer is that we don't 100% know, but we do know a few things. So we do know that when you're a baby in the womb, like a fetus, you're sterile. So your guts is not colonized by anything, or at least anything much. There may be one or two microbes in there. That's still up for debate. And then during the process of birth, and then the very short window of time afterwards, when you start interacting with your parents and you're kind of being handed around to grandparents and kissed and loved and everything, then you're picking up an awful lot of microbes during that time as well. And then from the age of birth to the age of about 3 years old, you're constantly picking up microbes from your environment. So think about, I don't know how many of you have baby brothers or sisters, but you can sort of see them wandering around, picking things up, putting them in their mouths. Yeah, and as parents, we're terrified of that, right? We're always trying to stop it because we're thinking, oh, it's germs, germs. But actually, as it turns out, we think that the reason for that is what babies are trying to do is to colonize themselves with microbes from the environment. And so it's actually an evolutionary kind of response to the environment. So that's kind of interesting. So when my daughters were born, I let both of them kind of dip their soothers in the dog's water, and that was fine. Both of them are very kind of strong, and they have good immune systems. I think that's probably because I just I let them get on with it in terms of colonizing themselves with microbes. And the important thing to remember here is that we tend to worry about all of these microbes in the environment that can cause disease. And of course, there are some that we do have to worry about, like we wouldn't ever eat raw meat or anything like that. But the other very important thing to remember about the microbes in the environment is that they educate the immune system. And so the more microbes that you expose yourself to in the early years of your life, especially, the more robust your immune system is and the better able it is to respond appropriately when a real threat is seen. So that's a really important part as well. So I think that again, going back to the question, that age from 0 to about 3 is a very, very important time for when the microbes really start to colonize the gut. And it's kind of an interesting thing from an ecology standpoint as well. The microbes are getting in there and they're all like fighting with each other, if you like. It's like tribal warfare. They're fighting with each other to be able to establish themselves in this new colony of the gut. And then eventually they figure it out, and they reach what we call a climax community, where the microbes have actually figured out, instead of fighting with each other, they've figured out how to actually get on with each other and to actually benefit from working together to colonize an environment. And then at that point, the human side of you, the immune system, has interacted as well with the microbiome, and in ways that, again, we don't quite understand yet. A sort of a set ecosystem becomes apparent, that becomes unique to you. So you do inherit, if you like. I don't like using that word because it implies genes, but you do actually get a lot of microbes from your parents, or from whoever were your caregivers when you were very tiny. And but then you also pick up your unique ones from whichever environment you interacted with as a child. And so it's a really interesting thing. And probably you also pick up microbes throughout your life, but that first 3 years seems to be the most important time.
Okay, perfect. Wow. And you just answered one of the follow-up questions about if we can still get it as an adult. And you said we do pick up throughout our life, yeah? We
do, but we don't, again, those are very difficult studies to do. So I don't think we really necessarily understand how much we pick up, or how shaped our microbiome is, or how plastic it is, and how much we can alter it. And so those sorts of questions we're starting to understand the answers to, but what we do know is that there's this very narrow window in early life where it's easy, and then it's a lot harder beyond that.
Okay. And just to go on about, so with that, you mentioned feeding the gut. You said we should eat more fruits and veggies. How exactly do like fruits and veggies compared to, let's say, I go eat some potato chips, so I like Doritos, so I eat Doritos.
And then, you know what?
To be exact,
yeah. So I think it's fine to have treats every now and again, as long as they don't make up the major part of your diet. The reason why fruits and vegetables are so important is, well, for lots of reasons, but the major one for your microbiome is, again, that they contain sugars, but not sugar like sucrose, like sweet sugars, but actual, when I say sugar, I mean carbohydrate. And these very complex carbohydrates are called fibers. So they're not necessarily sweet. But the important thing about these fibers that are present in fruits and vegetables is that they cannot be digested by the human side of us. Remember, I said humans are very puny when it comes to biochemistry. One of the things we can't do is we can't break down those fibers. So they pass right the way through our colon, or through our digestive tract into our colon, and they feed the microbes that live there. And so that's why it's very important to feed our microbes, because they rely on us to provide them with the main source of their nutrition, which is these fibers. And that's why that's so important.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned carbohydrates, right? So I'm reading here. This question is a bit long, so bear with me for a second.
Okay.
So the question is about people who suffer from gluten intolerance, and so gluten intolerance, and the effect that these types of carbohydrates, such as like wheat and things like that, how they affect people as compared to the fruits that you mentioned. Is it because of the different types of carbohydrates? Can you expand on that a bit, please?
Yeah, so when it comes to gluten intolerance, there's a particular type of gluten intolerance called celiac disease, which is very serious disease actually, and that's more of like an allergic response. It's and we understand that quite well. But some people also seem to be intolerant to some types of fibers, and that's probably again more to do with like a food intolerance. I don't know how much the microbiome plays in that, but I do know that there are many types of fiber, not just from wheat. Unfortunately, wheat is the one that seems to be most available here in the Western world, so everything has wheat in it. But there's many ways that you can get fiber in your diet without eating wheat, and so I think that if you can't eat wheat because you have an intolerance and you remove it from your diet completely, there are plenty of things that you can replace that with that would feed your microbiome just as well.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers that question.
I think it does. If they want to like any more follow up, they can ask. But I think it pretty much sums it up, like asking about like the effects of like high levels of gluten and things like that. So yeah. Okay, so now I have a question that takes us out of this world, pun intended. So this person is asking about how, like, do we know anything about any potential microbes in space, and how do they behave? Anything about that?
Oh, yeah. That's a very good one. So, well, I having studied, astronomy and being so interested in this, one of the things I'm very interested in, even though I don't actually directly study it, is astrobiology, which is the study of life outside of Earth, which we actually haven't discovered yet officially, and or even unofficially. But we can say a few things about it, right? So we know that, for example, there's a big debate right now about is there life on Mars, and we're not talking about little green men here, because I don't think we're going to actually find anything complex living on Mars, because the conditions there are pretty harsh. But what we do know by studying microbes in very harsh conditions on Earth is we can learn about these really incredible biochemistries they have. Again, this goes back to this amazing biochemical or biochemistry potential that they have. We know that some microbes are extremely tough, and they could live, if they were present on Mars, they could probably cope with it. And as long as they have the right kinds of substrates there and the right conditions, they could probably live there. They probably wouldn't be very happy because they're obviously terrestrial. But the idea is that if microbes on Earth could live under those conditions, then perhaps microbial life has or does exist on the planet Mars. And then discovering it would be a major thing, because it would tell us a lot about how life arises just in general. That's a big question in biology, and understanding how those biochemistries happen. But I think that astrobiologists basically look at life in very extreme environments on our own planet, and discover all sorts of incredible things that these microbes do to live in these, what we would consider to be horrible, harsh environments. And these harsh environments exist elsewhere in the solar system. We know that. And so it's quite possible that that life does exist beyond the realms of Earth, but we haven't officially found it yet.
Okay. Potentially one day, fingers crossed. That would be very interesting.
Oh, yes.
So now I have a question about this might be a bit of a difficult one to answer, but let's just see what you think about it. So the question asks, what are the best places to study molecular biology?
Oh, well, I would say Guelph. Of course I would.
Okay. Well, there you have it.
I think I think there are plenty of really great universities in Canada where you can study molecular biology. If you wanted to do microbiology in particular, a few universities stand out there. Obviously, Guelph, we have a very strong microbiology program here. The University of British Columbia is well renowned for their microbiology program, and the University of Toronto as well. And probably, I can think of a few now. I don't want to sort of leave anyone out, but Dalhousie on the East Coast there as well. So I think there's a lot of good places to do molecular biology, more microbiology. Molecular biology is a lot more general, and I think that most science universities with science offerings will have very good, strong programs in molecular biology.
Okay. Perfect. See, are there any more questions? Okay, we spoke about the probiotics and gut health, so we spoke about that one earlier on. So yeah, let me see if I can ask you one last one of my own questions. Since there are no more. Do I have anything really interesting? Oh yeah, so back to the impacts that the gut biome have on general health. I saw you mentioned, like, you listed a bunch of diseases that you yourself said that we don't think about as gut related conditions. So
Yes.
how? Yeah, how, exactly how. I mean, you're saying that we are these superorganisms that make up of. So essentially, human beings are a colony then?
Yes, I think. I mean, I have a tagline which I use in my email, which is that we are the spaceships for our microbes. Okay. That often we think of ourselves as controlling our bodies, but perhaps we're controlled more than we think by our microbes. And I think there's actually a really good experiment that was done not too far from here at McMaster University some time ago now, that was a real eye-opener in terms of how the microbes can control brain and behavior, because now we know that microbes in the gut, of all places, do have an influence on the way the brain works and behavior. And there's all sorts of work that I don't have time to go into that's being done that shows the pathways that allow that to happen. And it's not that the microbes are colonizing the brain. It's actually that they are communicating with us through these small molecules for the most part, which are basically being channeled through special nerve networks. There's the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system, and all of these are actually interacting with the brain through signaling, which is a really, again, if you want to do molecular biology, that's a very key part of molecular biology and cellular biology. And so the experiment that was done is a very simple one in terms of, it was very difficult to do, but a very sort of simple one, just sort of thinking about it in terms of how it was done. So what they did is they took two different types of mice. So anyone that's ever had a pet rodent knows that some pet rodents are easier to tame than others. And that's also true when you talk about mice. So there are certain mice lines which are used in research, which are known to be really aggressive and nasty and difficult to handle, and some which are really kind of timid and they're fine, and you pick them up and they're just happy. And so what these scientists did is they took two groups of mice, one which is a really happy, sort of easy to work with one, and one is a very aggressive mouse. And what they did is they derived these mice germ-free, which basically means they brought them up in an environment where they had no microbes whatsoever in their bodies. And then they colonized them with the opposite type of mouse's microbiome. So with the one type, the happy mouse that's normally happy, they took the aggressive mouse microbiome and they put it in their body, and they did the opposite for the aggressive mouse. And what do you know? The behavior of these mice changed, so that they actually saw a difference in the way that these mice behaved that seemed to therefore be directed by the microbes in the gut. So this is the first real evidence. It was a pretty seminal paper that really showed us that, wow, these microbes in the gut can actually affect the way that we behave. And of course, this was a mouse model, so how much this reflects on human behavior, we don't know, but we do know that there are some microbes out there, pathogens, which definitely do change our behavior. And so it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And so certainly for things like depression and anxiety, for autism and things like that, there's a possibility there that those diseases may actually be in, if not caused by, at least influenced by the microbiome of the gut. And so that's an interesting one. And then when it comes to things like diabetes, type 1 diabetes, which we know is an autoimmune disease, might actually be caused by an aberrant immune response. So the immune response responding badly to particular microbes in that very early phase of colonization, to the point where it tricks the immune system into making antibodies against part of you, in other words, part of the pancreas that makes insulin. And so there's lots of ways that microbes in the gut can influence our bodies to cause disease. But you know, when I first started working on the gut microbiome, we were only really working on gut diseases. And now we are working on all sorts of diseases outside of the gut, which I think really just shows how much the science is coming on, and how much we didn't know about, and we still don't know about how these microbes actually interact with us.
Wow. So I've got a lot of reading to do. Thank you so much. I think are there aren't any more questions. I think we'll wrap up right now. So do you have any parting words for all our listeners today?
Well, I would just say that I suspect most of the people that have joined today are interested in science, and don't lose that interest, because being a scientist is a calling, I think. And so never let anyone tell you otherwise. I think that you need to just go with your heart, because science is a real love affair. To me, it is anyway. And I think there's a lot of hard things to learn, but nothing is too hard if you break it down into small parts, and just you can overcome all of that fear about things being very hard. Science is when it works well, and when you start to understand it, it becomes incredibly intuitive, and it's a very, very rewarding career for sure.
Definitely. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for speaking. Thank you for all the information. Like I said, I have a lot of reading up to do now. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.